So I'd like to welcome you all to a very special event. It's the first time we've done anything like this because it's the first time we've been 25 years old. The next time will be hopefully 25 years from now. So all of us who were here 25 years ago remember looking out at this view and being enchanted by it. And the reason we chose this location for this event was to come back to this spectacular location. So we have a distinguished set of panelists who are going to share their thoughts with us this morning. You will get to ask them all the questions that you've been meaning to get answers to in the context of mobile computing, and they'll answer them. No pressure on any of you. But before I start with the questions and so on, let me just remind you what the world was like in 1994, okay? Because many of you some of you may not have been born, some of you may have been toddlers, right? So this was the dream that someday, maybe not immediately, but in the distant future, you'd be able to sit outside, maybe on that beach or a park like up here, and do work and have wireless access and get work done. This was the vision. Now, all of you look at this and say, what's the big deal? I do this every day, right? And that is the whole point. What to us was a dream is boring reality for you today, okay? Along the journey have been some really, really interesting landmarks. To the best of my knowledge, the very first machine that qualified sort of as portable was this compact, luggable machine. Apparently, it was the first portable machine that ran MS-DOS. Okay, and it weighed some ridiculous amount, 13 kilograms, I think, was the weight of that thing. If you were a reporter reporting from behind the Iron Curtain, remember, there was still an Iron Curtain in 1983. This machine, the Radio Shack Trash 80, Model 100, was powered by AA batteries, had a dial-up modem, and people used it to submit news reports. Within the decade, mobile devices in the form factor of a smartphone, but they didn't have the wireless, cellular wireless functionality. They had all the rest of it were available. They were called PDAs. Within the end of the decade, you already had wearable devices like IBM's Linux on a wristwatch, right? So that was 20 years ago, 19 years ago. The smartphones came along by 2007, 2008. And of course, in the past couple of years, we've had things like HoloLens, wearable devices, etc. Now, this is all about computing. On the communications front, this is a picture of a 915 megahertz wireless card, which I personally used. This is what you had to have in 1990, roughly, to get wireless communication. It took up an entire PC slot, okay, and was not Wi-Fi. The first small wireless devices that you could fit into your laptop, PC card form factor, was about 1990. And very soon after that, Intel came up with Centrino chips, and from then on, Wi-Fi has been a part of virtually all mobile devices. And more recently, of course, we've had 4G, and now 5G is being rolled out. So amazing, amazing transformation in a quarter of a century. So we have here 10 panelists. Every single one of them was in this room 25 years ago. This is where we had the workshop. Every one of them was either an author or a program committee member, and one of them, Marvin Timer over there, was both, okay? So what I'm going to do is just call upon them to just say a short few words about yourself, what you were doing in 1994, and what you're doing now, okay? And if they published a paper in 1994, that is shown up there. Okay, so you can see what paper they wrote, and you can go find it. So, Mushtaq. Please start with Mushtaq.
Thank you, Satya. Actually, I'd like to start by thanking you for putting this panel together. Not only, I'm impressed that he started this, but he's been involved in this for 25 years. I can't, do something for 25 years. So that's really impressive. Yes, I was here, and when he called me, I went back and looked at my notes on my, file system. Somewhere it was there. It's a good thing we don't have a digital Marie Kondo. I have not cleaned it up. So I looked at the notes, the paper, but I think the focus of the workshop and what I went back with and the paper that Satya just mentioned was a lot more on the infrastructure. We were worried about how do you get the data to the devices, when you need it, where you need it, and how it's going to be consistent, and I'm sure Doug is going to speak to that too. But I took back from this was the idea of using context that mobile devices could provide to you. In fact, a few years after that, at Georgia Tech, we were lucky to get some funding to actually build a house next to our campus. Didn't call it a smart home, but called it an aware home at the time. And did a lot of mobile devices, sensors, and some applications, a whole group of us. And I think that came, the idea came from this workshop. So it did have a big impact on what I did down the road for about 10 years.
Fantastic. Mary?
Well, thank you, Satya, for putting this together. I remember it as being a very exciting event. It felt a little bit like the Wild West to me, or what I imagined that might have been like, in that there was lots of excitement, a feeling that we were onto something really cool, that there were lots of risks and lots of opportunities, and opportunities we really couldn't even imagine yet, and that it was a lot of people just didn't get it yet. And so I remember that feeling, and I remember the feeling that there were, that I came away with the idea that there were just so many problems to work on and so many new things to envision. So it was invigorating and inspirational workshop, I felt. I remember I was working on just being able to move computers about from one network to another. Just to have the bits still go back and forth to them as you move from one network to another. So, even something as primitive as the plumbing, there was, already, it was a serious problem at that time. And it's sometimes still a problem, but it's sure gotten a lot better.
That's great. Thank you, Mary. Nigel?
Okay. Yeah, so for me, when I came here in 1994, this was the first time I'd ever been to California. And I remember sort of the first morning of the workshop, of course, terribly jet-lagged, having got up very early, and with Adrian Friday, who was here as well, sitting down in a diner, sort of just in the corner of this building, eating blueberry pancakes for the first time ever, and thinking I'd died and gone to heaven. So I spent, yeah, so I kind of spent the next 25 years trying to work out how to eat blueberry pancakes as often as possible. At the time, we were working on basically applications to support engineers in the electricity industry. So we were creating some of the first sort of mobile collaborative applications. And that sort of application focus then went on to shape a lot of the work that I've done over the years, so things like the Guide project as well. And the workshop quickly told me that if I did applications work, that there was a blessing in that then everybody would immediately remember me as the application guy. And the downside to it was that even a decade later, I would walk up to people and they'd say, "Oh, you're the power guy. You do electricity work." And it's like, well, not really. I do applications work. But that's generally been the focus, and the workshop really helped me sort of shape that research agenda around system support for new applications.
Thank you, Nigel. Mike?
Great. Yeah, well, thanks to Satya for reaching out to us in the old computing pioneers home. Get us out here. We don't get out as much as we used to. So when I was here 25 years ago, I was actually a freshly minted assistant professor. I was visiting. It's not my home community. I typically publish in the database community, so it's my first systems conference. And I gave kind of a crazy talk. Had the best title, I believe, humbly say, of any paper ever, called "Are Disks in the Air Just Pie in the Sky?" And what we were talking about was if you could do repetitive broadcast and different things at different frequencies, you could create kind of a memory hierarchy in a communications device by having, popular stuff come by more often than less popular stuff. You could build this kind of arbitrary memory hierarchy, which I thought was, it was kind of a cute idea, probably not the most practical thing in the world. But as I'm giving my talk, like the audience, I could just hear it. It was like this murmuring, and it was just growing louder and louder and louder. And people were like, just ready to I felt like they were going to jump me on the stage. I don't know exactly why. I put up my conclusion slide, and all the hands go up. Just about every hand goes up. And then I had one more slide. I had a future work slide, and I put that on. This was with an overhead projector, right? And Randy Katz, who was the session chair, I'll always remember this, got up. This is the first time and the last time this ever happened to me at a conference. Got up and shut off the projector and said, "I think you are trying to run out the clock." And it's time to take some questions. So we took a bunch of questions. I don't remember many of them, I'm sorry to say, but I do remember Satya had a very insightful comment where he, in a very polite way, accused us of kind of reinventing the Mercury delay line.
I forgot all about that.
So anyway, it was a very formative moment in my research career, and I loved the energy and the interaction in the community, so I was thrilled to be invited to come back for this panel.
Thank you so much, Mike. Dave?
I want to start with echoing my thanks from everybody else as well to you for organizing this panel. And also like to thank you for the picture you started with this morning. For those who don't know, which means probably just Satya and me may know, if he remembers, that's my laptop.
Indeed,
and
I do.
as a demonstration of how things have changed since then, the antenna you saw sticking out of that laptop was for sending digital data packets over the analog voice phone network. So there's a good reason that data network doesn't exist anymore, because the analog phone network doesn't exist anymore. The wireless modem for it fit inside the body of that ThinkPad in replacement for the floppy disk drive that was normally in there. Things have changed quite a bit. When I was here for this panel, the workshop 25 years ago, my paper was on ad hoc networking, which I'd just started doing. I had been doing mobile IP for a couple of years, including using that laptop. And coming to this workshop was kind of very exciting in the sense of those of us who had sort of started on our own or sort of in small groups, whatever, doing mobile computing, mobile networking. This was really the first event that brought us all together. And there was, other papers in networking here. Mary mentioned her paper. There were other papers, of course, on applications. It was the first real mobile computing event. So it was very exciting to be here and really great to be back in the same hotel. I've been trying to reconcile my 25-year-old memories with what I see physically here. And of course, the part that matches the closest is the view of the beach.
That hasn't changed. Thank you very much, Dave. Randy?
Again, thank you, Satya, for giving me excuse to get out of the administration building at Berkeley. As a pioneer with the arrows in the back, I go by, kind of a set of statements that I keep in my mind. I used to hope I'd be remembered for something. Then I'd hope to be remembered. Now I just hope. So the conference, or the workshop, which took place in December 1994, was just at a point where I was transitioning back to the university from having spent 2 years at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And part of the reason why I had gone to DARPA was in order to kind of launch a program in mobile computing because of all the excitement that was happening at that cusp of the late 1980s, early 1990s, and it left behind a program that was actually executed and developed by a colleague, Barry Leiner, called Global Mobility Systems, that at least a few of the people on the panel probably took advantage of in terms of funding. I have to say, I was of course, when Satya invited me, I went back, and the internet allows you to go back 25 years and look at the program for the workshop, and the only paper I remembered from that conference, I'm sorry to say, colleagues, was Mike Franklin's paper.
Now you know why you remember.
Well, I was also on the program committee, so of course I can now reveal the secrets of the program committee about bits in the air are bits in the air, pie in the sky. We all thought this was the craziest, silliest, stupidest idea you could possibly imagine. But wouldn't it be wonderful to put this guy, Mike Franklin, out in front of the community and have them tear him to shreds? It would, for those of you who've been on program committees for conferences, and it's a workshop, right? I mean, it's supposed to have some controversial ideas. What could be more controversial than, sort of burning power to keep broadcasting these bits, in this sort of crazy recirculating, sort of pattern? It's a crazy idea. It was well written. It was a well-written idea. It was a well-argued idea, just a crazy idea that didn't make any sense. So let's put it out, and we'll get a lot of discussion going. So I did not remember that I basically pulled the plug on you during the presentation, but I'm sure that what I had in the back of my mind is let's get on to the questions, because there's going to be a lot of them. And so, maybe that's a signature of where we were in 1994 in terms of it was an opportunity for wild and crazy ideas and a lot of really exciting discussion around that. And that's the thing I remember most about December 94.
Thank you, Randy. Christian?
Thanks for organizing this exciting panel. I just picked one topic which I find most amusing. There was a panel discussion here on whether mobile computing will become a serious business. So I just want to give you an example from a neighboring area. So cellular phones were invented at Bell Labs, cellular technology. And then AT&T went to McKinsey and asked them whether they should get into this business. And McKinsey came back with a recommendation, don't get into this business. By year 2000, there are going to be perhaps about 1 million phones. And they did not get into that business. And 94, AT&T had to acquire Macaw to get into that business. In this area, always projections have lagged behind the reality. Mobile computing area, if you look at the business done by FANG, because they provide their services mostly through smartphones now, is probably about 10 times the size of cellular industry. And that's why I found that to be really amusing. So this workshop really took place at a time where it was going to take off really. At this point, it's like almost dominates, I would say, the entire computing industry.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Then we have the twins from Amazon. They were twins. They were twins even then, okay? They were both at Xerox PARC. Doug had 2 papers and co-authored with Marvin, and Marvin had 2 papers co-authored with Doug. So Doug?
Yeah, so as he said, I was at Xerox PARC at the time. I had been there 10 years already. And I had the opportunity at PARC twice in my career to hire my own boss, which is great. One of those was a guy named Mark Weiser. When he came in, he wanted a focus for the lab, and that focus ended up being ubiquitous computing. Were you in the working group where we were like hanging out? We used to hang out we spent months hanging out the Dutch Goose, drinking a lot of beer to come up with ubiquitous computing.
I came right after you guys did.
Okay.
It's after the good times.
Yeah.
So I missed that.
You missed all the beer.
You can still go to Cabo.
But you made up for it later.
Exactly.
And then Marvin came, and Roy started, and others started building hardware devices. Marvin and I took responsibility for coming up with the software architecture to tie all these devices together, and what did it mean to actually build prototypes that showed the power of ubiquitous computing. That's when the Bayou Project started. We actually had 2 papers on Bayou at this workshop, one that Marvin had written and one that I had written. The one that I wrote and presented was actually the very first paper here. Not that really means anything, but and it was on the architecture of the Bayou system. We were laying out, here are the choices that we made in defining this architecture. Here's why we're doing it that way. We were just in the process of building the system, and so it was actually a great opportunity to get feedback, and I really appreciate all the feedback I got on that day. In terms of the paper itself, there is one characteristic of that paper that I think is worth mentioning, which is while I was writing that paper, I was thinking, okay, I need to come up with something to define this style of replication that we're using. And so that paper that was presented here in 1994 is the first paper that used the term eventual consistency. And now, 25 years later, I'm at Amazon Web Services, and we're still building systems based on eventual consistency.
Thank you, Doug. Marvin?
Yeah, so he already said a lot of the stuff I was going to say. So for me, what was fascinating here, I'm going to focus on two things. So, at Park, we were working on this idea of ubiquitous computing, and sort of the idea because, at the time, we talked about things like we have today, except I felt like I was writing a science fiction story. If there was a day in the life of UV was a document I wrote where we talked about, being able to use the RFID keys and having, this thing in your hand and having little pads that were like paper and so forth. But it was science fiction, right? I felt like a little bit of a fraud because, we'll see whenever this happens, right? So that's my biggest memory aside from the view of this. But I want to focus on another thing, which is, Doug mentioned this eventual consistency, and it's fascinating to see how you get spin-offs from one area to another. Because what I work on now and have worked on for a long time is cloud computing, basically global scale back-end server systems in data centers. Seems like it's as far away from mobile computing as you can imagine. And yet the techniques that we developed for mobile computing are the distance between two data centers on the other side of the world feels a lot like what we thought the distance was to a disconnected or a partially connected mobile device, right? So the techniques that you develop here are interesting because if you stretch your mind to them, they end up covering a lot of the cases that come in other areas, right? And for me, that's one of my biggest memories from this is going, wow, we're in this area that had to do with control devices, and yet I'm using the techniques because I call it right time to hot point.
Thank you, Marvin. Roy?
Thanks. So I was the British guy who came to Park in 1991 and had to crawl out of that hole. But the thing that I was interested in at that time was indoor location. And when I heard about the ubiquitous computing vision, I saw the opportunity of combining, that concept, which we'd actually implemented initially at Olivetti with a badge system called the Active Badge, with a real computer, which you could carry around and perhaps put in your pocket on the small end of the scale. There were other projects which worked on pads. So I was very excited about that. And at that time, I called the behavior of the computer as he moved around context-sensitive computing. And there was a big group discussion with Bill Schiller and Norman Adams and I think a few others. And eventually, for the paper that was presented here, it was called Context-Aware. And actually, that's the name that stuck.
It's the first use of that name, right?
That's right. The first use of that name. And just to sort of summarize what it was, is that we had a small device called a Park Pad, which was my main project at that time. I wonder if I can bring it up. No, this isn't the Park Pad, but we couldn't bring one today, but I was able to find a photograph of it. So what it did was, it was a really dumb computer. It was based on a microcontroller with hardly any memory. And so we achieved the context awareness by talking locally to infrared transceivers, which connected everything back to big, powerful workstations. And basically, it was an RPC mechanism, which then updated the display. It took key events from the switches. And so that was the way which we gave you, if you like, a time travel feel into this new world of mobile computing. And the cool thing about it was, even unlike today, is that those microcells were per room, and so we had per room location. And so we could actually sort of try and travel even into a situation where we're not, it's not completely resolved at this point in time, to
you sort of factor that in already? In which case, you did. All right. So then we'll advance to question 2. Yeah, please do. If you want, yeah, add. Go ahead.
But I still remember it, but I don't remember why. Was that at Reader's Workshop? I forget. Reader's Workshop, right? Because we went to the coffee at lunch, and we had, you probably don't even remember this, you have the little green sticker that says, you know, you want a vegetarian meal. And the waiter comes and brings your plate down. And I've known Satya for a long time. He's usually a pretty easygoing, mellow guy. But he got this total look of disgust on his face. And he complained to the waiter, right? And the waiter's response, here in Santa Cruz no less, was, that is the vegetarian meal. Chicken is not meat.
I didn't remember that until this moment. Thank you, Doug.
You want another sweeter there one? My most vivid memory was actually what I often do at conferences, meeting people for the big beer in town. I don't know whether any of you 25-year-old people who were with me on this trip, who anticipated how cold it would be in December in Santa Cruz. I didn't bring a jacket. We went out, don't remember which night, we went out looking for beer. We walked into town, freezing, found the place there closed. Everyone following me saying, where's the beer? And then we went to place number 2, which was somewhere along the coast over here past the pier. And we finally found our beer. But we walked around, I don't know, I'm freezing.
In the age before Google. And
Yes, that's right.
And Uber and mobile
That's
apps.
right.
Any other reminiscences to add that you want? From
Any else was
anybody else?
on
Yeah,
that
Nigel?
trip to get beer? I'm not surprised. I don't remember that. Yeah.
one of the things that struck me as we sort of moved from '94 onwards was that computing used to be an area of professionals. You know, we did computing, and university folk did computing, and obviously industry, but you know, not my relations and cousins, and now of course it's totally integrated with society. The other point that I'd like to make is that we all understand, I think, conceptually Moore's law and exponential growth, right? We're all scientists, we're engineers, we understand that. But I don't think in our hearts we understand exponential growth. We kind of, in our minds and hearts, we kind of think of linear growth. And when you consider something like the doubling of memory, or just doing a little calculation here, is that probably the memories in about 1994 were about 8 megabytes.
Bigger than I remember.
You can, or maybe, yeah, maybe
4
so,
megabytes was plenty in those.
so if you had a megabyte, you have about a minute of MP3 music, right? So I mean, you could barely get a song on one of these things if you digitized it. But with the doubling of memory every year, suddenly you had a song, suddenly you had an album, suddenly you had your music collection with you, and this is what's truly amazing. I don't think it's intuitive. It's intellectually understandable, but I don't think it's intuitive that kind of growth happened, and we enjoyed that in order to propel this industry forward.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we're going to switch now to the other mode. So please state your name, where you're from, and then ask your question. And if you want to direct it at a specific individual or individuals, you can. If you don't, you can just pose it to the panel, and whoever wants can speak up. When we think that people have run out of things to say, we'll move on to the next person. Okay? Start with you.
Alec Wallman from Microsoft Research. So you guys have talked about sort of the surprising things that happened in the 25 years after the 1994 workshop. I'm curious if there were things that people expected to happen during that 25 years that didn't come to pass, and if so, do you think they're likely to come to pass in the future? And this is wide open for anyone on the panel to answer.
Okay, I'll start. So, as I mentioned, I was doing mobile IP for a couple of years before the workshop. My paper here was on ad hoc networking, which is another story about what did or didn't come to pass. But we all expected mobile IP to be in use by everybody in their laptop. As you move around, you're going to just seamlessly hand off all the time. And most of the use of data recognizes disconnection and even IP address changes. You know, even your web browser, you just click on reload if you change your IP address in the middle of it. It just works. But then suddenly the cell phone industry discovered mobile IP, and in 3G data for CDMA, mobile IP is explicitly used. They even actually cite the mobile IP standard. It's used internally to lower the overhead inside. The mobile user never notices it. I have a phone that I used to be able to access the internal service menus of and find my home agent IP address in my own phone. But now it's essentially incorporated into GPRS, and it's there. So it's both a thing that didn't come to pass, but then a thing that did come to pass in a way nobody foresaw.
Yeah, so I think my comment is quite similar. The sort of vision of the time was seamless mobility, which was based on a lot of thinking about peer relationships between service providers and, you know, the support for things like mobile IP, which was a very hot research topic in that time frame of the early 90s. So the vision, the aspiration was seamless connectivity as you would be mobily going around the world. And, you know, I was thinking of how far from that vision we sort of went through a sort of valley where, if you remember from there aren't enough gray-haired people here, but when you went roaming with your cell phone in the early days of cell phones, you actually had to have a manual with you which had star followed by 5-digit codes, which would allow, if you were a singular subscriber, to possibly roam in, you know, some other operator's network in another part of the country, for example. And that seamless roaming has vision of it working seamlessly didn't really happen, but now we have these essentially global networks. If I'm AT&T, I can pretty much pop up anywhere in the world and my cell phone will work with data access. But I can't actually roam from up in further north in California. If AT&T doesn't have a service there, then I'm out of luck, pretty much with my cell phone. It's sort of interesting how we both haven't quite achieved it, but have kind of achieved it, but it was not the way we anticipated it as either.
Yeah, I'd say for me it was around location actually and location technology. So I remember talking to Roy and then we fitted the active badge network into our lab at Lancaster and I kind of felt like we were done with indoor localization and this was all going to be fine. And 25 years later my Tracker Mobitus pages are still full of indoor localization stuff. It just feels like somehow that never came to pass in the way that I expected. I genuinely thought we would be completely, indoor localization would be a done thing by now.
I just wanted to add on to that to say that there is hope because the IEEE
that's the last of the three things.
did standardize time of flight based ranging to access point in December 2006, and over the last 2 years there's been significant progress in moving that from voice to really exciting. So maybe in 5 years we'll get another one.
I'll keep waiting. So for me, the thing that I'm kind of disappointed in is I expected that real-time data analytics and data access would be sort of the default mode of data processing back then, and that is slowly happening. But the problem, it's going to happen. The problems aren't technical problems; they're sort of business process problems. That there's a lot of business processes out there that just aren't built for dealing with instantaneous information and the changes that happen when you're on that quick of a cycle. And so to me, it's been kind of a surprise that as fast as the technology moves, a bunch of the other things that are required to exploit that technology move at a much slower pace.
Excellent. Anyone else have a comment? Yeah, Marvin?
So one of the things that we talked a lot about back then, certainly at Park, is these days called disaggregated computing, right? The idea that you would have, displays littered around and your computing devices would connect seamlessly to all of them as you wander around, and that collaboration would involve all this stuff cooperating. And we can do it, but I'm surprised at the fact that we haven't gotten farther on it. I made a joke earlier at breakfast that I expect to retire before I can actually finally get a projector to work for a meeting. It actually works these days. I mean, it's actually, okay, good, so my point made. So, we know how to do this, and we're seeing, we're starting to see it, but I'm surprised at how slowly it's going. And so that was one of my biggest surprises. I speculate that as IoT gets more pervasive, as Alexa and voice and so forth and become more pervasive, we may see more of this. But so far, it still feels like we each use our little devices ourselves, and I'm surprised at how much time I spend manually doing things between devices that I would not have expected that I have to do that in 2019.
Fantastic. So, Christian, go ahead.
So one of the things that was expected in those days was there would be different
Christian,
type
can you
of
use the
content.
microphone?
Sorry?
Just use the microphone. It's a little
Microphone.
soft.
Okay. All right. So in those days, it was expected that there will be separate content for mobile phones and for laptops, etc. In fact, there were different languages. Satya mentioned WAP. There were HTML, and those things did not happen. It's the same language now in which the content. So that's one of the things that is really good that was not necessary to do.
Okay. So I'm going to go on to the next question. I'm going to alternate microphones. So Aruna, you get to ask the next question, and feel free to join the shorter line.
Aruna Balasubramanian from Stony Brook. So you all talked about how in '94 you had a vision, and at that time it felt like it was science fiction. What is your science fiction now?
Well,
Yeah,
so
So I think yesterday we had a paper, I think Satya's student, about distraction, reducing distraction. I think these devices are still very distracting too. I find that, in fact, the state I come from, Georgia, the legislature passes all kind of stupid laws, but one this year was so I'm hoping that I think we're talking about voice and audio. Audio is a lot less distracting in some sense. I think camera, if I look at a screen while I'm driving, that's still a problem. So I think the original Mark Weiser sort of vision where we think just we don't have to interact with them as much as we do today. I think that's one thing I feel. Hopefully it'll happen someday.
I guess I have a couple of science fiction episodes that run in my mind periodically. One of them is not at all exciting. It's really centered around safety and sort of humanity of the technology. I guess Mark Weiser's vision has been brought up already, but the idea that a lot of what's really working should be kind of invisible to us and not necessarily grab our attention all the time. And so, I envision better house-trained devices, that aren't beeping and blinking and making noises. I envision systems where I don't have to keep proving who I am to them for it to be possible for me to just get whatever it is I'm thinking of done. I envision a lot that when we talk about seamless computing, at least when I talk about seamless computing and networking back in 1994, it was about getting the bits back and forth without any kind of stalls. Now it's just about moving through my life without all these hiccups and obstacles. So there's that part of it. And my other science fiction is a way of moving between the real world and our digital world, where I think there's a lot of interest around, there's something, the virtual thing that's somehow better than a physical thing, and I don't believe that. My science fiction in my mind is ways of making some of the virtual things real and physical so that people can understand them, interact with them intuitively, because we're used to physical things, and that includes aspects of security and privacy as well. So those are the things in my mind. They don't sound as exciting as compute anywhere, anytime, the way that did in 1994, but they're a result and fallout, I think, from what we've enabled. And when you enable something wonderful, you also enable some nightmares as well. And so addressing those, I think, is the cleanup in my mind as part of the science fiction.
Yeah, I think for me the science fiction part is now around the sort of the way that we can use these kinds of devices to augment us as people. Sat and I just recently worked on a paper about sort of augmented cognition and augmented memory, and I think that those for me are the really sort of exciting applications. The idea that in a few years I'll be able to kind of essentially sort of plug in a 16K RAM pack into my head, right, and just do an upgrade. I mean, 25. Yes, well,
I didn't mean K.
Well, ZX81 time. I'm still, I'm kind of regressing back to that time. It's kind of 25 years on, and I bumped into somebody, and obviously they were slightly upset that I didn't remember their name, and I thought I can barely remember my own name these days, right? And so the idea of having kind of augmented capabilities for people through mobile devices, to me, that seems very exciting, and that to me require all sorts of new technology.
Fantastic. Any other comments? Yes, Randy?
Almost in line with that. I think in my case, I'd like the 16 terabytes. I'm not sure what the right term for it is, but I think of it as being user awareness. So I find it very frustrating when the app
self-driving cars have been almost beaten to death. Basically many companies are building it. But the question is, are these self-driving cars safe on roads? So there's aspiration in the research community which is called augmented autonomy. DARPA has a program in this area, and Johns Hopkins University has started an institute for this. The idea there is that these cars will communicate with each other and will create a system that will make car driving as safe as air travel. You can think about the same thing with drones and all these other ways also. So clearly this is, I think, distributed computing taken to ultimate limits. How to create this? So again, as I mentioned, it's not that I'm mentioning it for the first time. There are a number of people who have this aspiration, but I've not really seen any solutions for this.
Okay.
Here's my vision. I'd like not carry this with me everywhere I go, between home and campus, to conferences and workshops. Looking around the room, I see at least one even larger bag. There's a laptop in here, there's paper in here. We still cannot get by without carrying this kind of stuff with us. Even though we have our phones in our pocket that do a whole lot of things for us, it doesn't replace the larger screen of a laptop. It doesn't replace the ease of reading a stack of physical paper as opposed to something on a small screen. I don't know what it's going to take to get us to where I don't have to carry this with me.
Even better, when Nigel visited me last week at Carnegie Mellon, he brought his laptop. The first thing he asked me for was, would you mind for the 2 or 3 days that I'm here, if you can loan me a full-size screen, a full-size keyboard, and a real mouse? He's right here. I tell the truth.
I never use any of those.
But
even in my office at home, I use my laptop.
But this goes back to the point, I think, that either Marvin or Roy, I forget, one of you made the point, I think it was Marvin who made the point about being able to use things around you to do this. I mean, he had to ask me. It was not provided by virtue. Any other comments on this question, Marvin?
I'm going to throw out a grand challenge. It's the anti-mobile challenge. I don't want to have to travel anymore because these are all manifestations of having to travel. Think about the carbon footprint that we generated by all coming here and the amount of time you spent getting here and coming back. The true vision in my mind of mobile computing should be I should be able to go around doing the normal things I'm doing and yet be able to have this conference without ever having had to go across the planet to do it. And that is a mobile computing challenge because I don't want to be in a box in a VR coffin.
I want to go to the beach.
All right. So let's switch question. Next
you.
question over there.
Hello, I'm Frank Liu from Arizona State. I'm a first year, and I'm sure there are many other early career first year students. So my question to you is, given where you are now, what advice would you give yourself to the you that was 20 years before sitting in the same position?
Anyone?
Yes, I'll give you some corporate advice for those of you or about to join large corporations or in large corporations. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of these research ideas, I think, they go for a little bit and then they die. And my advice to anybody is find the highest levels corporate sponsor you can get and get them excited about that. And if there's a reorganization, find the new guy and get him excited about that. That's really essential. Otherwise, it's very hard to keep some of the really interesting projects going.
Can I build on that?
Yeah, Bill. Okay.
So I think that's true, but I mean, my advice, building on that, is find something you're excited about first and go do it, and that's how you get the other people excited.
Mike?
Well, so my advice is, so I told that story about Randy shutting off my projector, and I was not very happy about that, but I didn't show my displeasure. I was very polite back to Randy. 10 years later, I ended up sharing a cubicle with Randy for like 5 years. So, so the lesson there is you should always be nice to people because you never know when you're going to see them again.
Exactly. That's true.
Any other suggestion, Mary?
Yeah, I would say never underestimate.
We still hired you, even though you wrote that paper.
I would say never underestimate the power of a Skunkworks project. actually building the things, you know, in secret when nobody's looking. Once you have something you can actually show people, they can poke at it and you can demo it, and there's a lot of power in that. I think it's much harder to sell ideas based on the vision alone. So yeah, take that time that you have, if you have any spare time, and build what you're excited about.
Marvin? So I'm going to take an opposite point of view here, which is I have found that some of the best ideas and one of the most reliable ways of getting ideas is to go and work on something that's useful. Advice I got from one of my advisors in grad school was figure out something somebody wants and build it. If you're lucky, you'll just build it, in which case you should go sell it and make a lot of money. But 90% likelihood is you're going to figure out a dozen reasons why you couldn't build it, and those are all papers to publish. Now, I'm going to tell you what the last 10 years of my life in product life has been. I did research for 25 years, and for the last 13 or so, I've been in products. And I've been very successful by having the following approach. I get drawn to the worst trash fire in the company. And by that I mean a problem that, you know, has been smoldering for a while, so it wasn't easy to solve, but it looks completely boring. I got involved with metering and billing, for example, in AWS, and those sound like they're the worst, most boring things possible. But when you dig into why it's a trash fire, you find, and if you ask yourself what was the root cause and how would you solve this for good, you discover lots of good research issues. And guess what? Those research issues are guaranteed to be useful because you're actually solving a real problem. I've come across much harder problems by letting myself be driven that way than by any other. Now, there's lots of other ways to get good ideas and do good research, but this is one very useful way, and so I want to throw that out as another alternative.
Christian?
Yeah, so if you have a good idea, you know, you should have persistence. If you get criticized, you know, very often in a large company, in fact, there's some folks here from large companies, if you come up with an idea that's going to make what that company is doing obsolete, there'll be a lot of pushback on that. There have been many cases at Bell Labs, we have done such things. For example, AT&T Network Systems had a $10 billion business to build these huge switches called 5ESS. So a couple of researchers from Murray Hill went and told them this will disappear. They were replaced by something called soft switches, and they were laughed out of the building. Now that 10 billion business is down to probably about 10 million. So there are many other cases. You know, for example, I had a personal experience with software-defined networking along the same lines also. So if you have a good idea, any great idea will get a lot of resistance at the beginning. Have persistence.
Fantastic. Any other comments? Mushtaq?
So I can add, there's a former student of mine came and said, I have this idea, and I said, it's never going to work. And he persisted, and I let him do that, and he now has a company with over 300 employees based on that idea and $200 million in investment. So I think you should have some bit of respect for folks who, you said first year faculty, but students, and let them go off the, you know, even if you think they're going nowhere. I think that risk taking is something academics are not really great at, and I think that's something I do with my students.
The flip side of that is a message that says, don't listen to your advisor.
For him, that is certainly true, but there are a lot of others who.
Dave?
To quote the movie Field of Dreams in a different or broader context, if you build it, they will come.
Cool. Any other comments before we go to the next question? Okay, you're next.
Yeah, Neil Klainsworth from Wisconsin. So I'm working on this mobile privacy area, right? And there seems like there's a conflict of interest between the research community, which is trying to develop technical solutions for that, and the sort of like the corporate service providers that are, you know, kind of pushing back, right? And I was just wondering if, you know, if you guys had encountered anything like that in the past, and sort of like how that was managed, you know, other kinds of research projects that also had sort of like conflicts between, you know, possibly government research and product.
Christian?
So I don't know whether any solutions here, but I just mention a research project I saw at Columbia University that's done by Henning Schulz-Rein, who's the father of SIP and RTP. So they were, what his students had done, they were looking at information coming out of an Alexa box, and they were able to extract a lot of personal information from that. Now, I think the only way of really solving this problem, but there was one solution discussed here yesterday in terms of is perhaps to do a lot of this voice recognition, etc., right in Alexa. So again, Satya, another application for edge computing. Put it there and compress these large machine learning models in the cloud and prune them and put them in this. So in fact, there is some work going on in Bell Labs, Cambridge, and there's some researchers from there along those lines. I'm sure there's work being done in other places. So that will be kind of good to do in terms of that. So solutions, clearly mobile privacy is, for example, if my wife, when she heard that everything that I speak into Alexa is going to Amazon Cloud, she said, she turned it off immediately, threw it out. So again, if somebody can solve this problem, I think there is perhaps going to be a pretty big business.
Randy?
Yeah, so isn't it amazing that the finest minds of our time have developed this incredible, societal surveillance system that we call—
That's part of the nightmare, yes.
Talk about the dystopian science fiction vision that actually exists, right? So one of the things that's really interesting about this sort of intersection of this kind of technology and the way in which it's been embedded in society is there actually has to be a dialogue, not so much with the corporate world, but with the regulatory world. So what is the legal framework? What are our rights as citizens? I encourage you, as you pursue technological solutions to privacy, of also engaging in a conversation with maybe the law school or the public policy school or something like that, because in our elected officials, they're trying to figure out what to do to protect us without a good technological voices that are not the lobbying voices of industry. Sort of giving them ideas on what is technologically feasible, and I think ideas like keeping privacy data local rather than sharing it in the cloud. What is the implications for the sort of future technological architectures? But what are those sort of architectural options that can be configured in the appropriate way by a regulatory environment, let's say, in order to ensure people's privacy? There are a variety of different ways of doing it. I'm not sure I know the right way of doing it, but I think a dialogue between technologists in research environments and our elected officials or the people advising them would be very, very beneficial in this area.
Nigel? Oh, sorry.
I would echo that in corporate environments too, because at least in my company there are lots of lawyers and legal people and a privacy office, and engaging them in dialogues. They have a fantastic vision about what can be regulated, what companies can do to protect their brand name and not create things that will violate people's privacy. Some of them are better at it than others. But I would not just in a research environment, even in an academic research environment, but in a corporate research environment, I would echo Randy's suggestion and seek out those dialogues.
I would say it's the pervasiveness, actually, of the way in which, walk down any street in the United States and everybody is looking into their screens. So it's a point where it's not just technology for technology people. It's really, it's a society. Society depends on it, and it's fully embedded in society. So other forces come into play in terms of, thinking about its use.
Doug?
So I sense that you're asking not just about privacy, right? You're asking about the general question of where there's a disconnect between research and the corporate values and the corporate priorities, right? And to be quite honest, we had that in the Bayou Project. We did this work, and after about 5 years, I was told, you need to stop doing this because this eventual consistency crap you're doing is not valuable. It's never going to be practical. Xerox is a document company. You need to go do something else. And so I went and did something else. I went and started a startup company. Okay, that's when I left Park. But so this is not a new problem. It happens all the time, and you have to decide as a researcher how you're going to deal with that. Either you adapt to the company, or you go follow your dreams, as I did, and do something else.
Nigel?
I was struck by some comments that Roy was making earlier about the difference between a sort of understanding at a sort of scientific level about sort of changes in the growth of memory and processing power and stuff, and then what our heart actually tells us. And I think one of the challenges here is that certainly when you deal with regulators, which I do a reasonable amount in terms of health data, the speed at which they're able to work is completely disconnected from the speed at which the problems manifest themselves. And I don't think we've somehow quite got on top of the fact that you can do something stupid and then roll it out to millions and millions of people overnight. And for me, that's the change. We've lost the ability to kind of have a sort of slow rollout of technology and then understand the implications and grow to live with it. Suddenly we use the entire planet as our research lab.
It's all Q&A done by the poor end user.
Yeah, and it's so fast. So actually the regulator is always going to be a bit slow.
Marvin?
Technology tends to go where society drives it. This is, I think, something that's been around forever. For example, I remember at Microsoft there was the time when the company stopped and finally paid attention to security. And what it came down to is for a long, long period of time, users didn't care about it. And so you'd ask the people in the office groups, what do you want? You know, the office people would ask, what do you want? Well, I want more functionality. Well, what about the privacy or the security? I don't really care about that, right? Just give me more functionality. Gimme, gimme, gimme. And so that's what you build, right? And then when people start paying attention to it, then products start getting changed in that direction, right? And honestly, I saw that as a kid. My parents were physicists. It was the Cold War. The questions around what you do in terms of physics were the same ones back then. So I've seen this my entire life. This is not new to mobile computing. It's not new to privacy, right? It does come down to how society views things. I had an interesting experience 10 years ago. We tried to do a survey to get information from users about their high-performance computing needs. And the first reaction was, I'm not going to give you that. I'm not willing. Well, guess what? For $25, they would. We gave them a $25 discount on some stupid thing. I forget what it was. And we got an amazing response rate, right? And look at what people do with their credit card information and so forth. It's the same thing. So I think, you know, it's more complicated than just saying we're going to regulate it. It's more complicated than saying it's evil corporations or anything like that. It's society as a whole. And I would argue one of the things we as researchers can do is to make sure that the issues are clearly enunciated, right? A lot of times people are oblivious to this stuff. I certainly see it when I work with various engineers. You're working on cool technology, you're focused on the cool aspect of it, and you kind of don't think about what some of the side effects of it are until somebody points it out. And the minute somebody points it out, it's like, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that, right? So part of our job is to make sure that is characterized so that people are aware of what the consequences are. I don't know what to do beyond that other than, talk to government, talk to everybody and so forth, but I don't think there's a silver bullet.
So I want to take one more question. Christine, that's all we have time for. Sorry, guys. Christine.
Okay, Christine Liu, University of Colorado Boulder. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. Actually, I think the discussion is already leading to my question, or maybe addressing some of the part of my question. So I am more like coming from the point is about looking at the 25 years of mobile computing, about how it used to be something that you go to the lab, you do it to go to lab to work on the computer. It's kind of separated from your normal or regular life, and now it's everywhere. And that is definitely changing in terms of mentioning security, privacy, or just a user, right? Whether this is actually something convenient. So I do observe it's more like we are creating technology because we can, and then we think, oh, okay, there may be other things that maybe we need to either address when it comes out, but then the question is more about looking back and looking forward is to what extent we can proactively, of course we can talk to people outside our community, but within our community, are there things that we could potentially follow so that whatever new technology or cool technology we're trying to create should have some kind of, I don't know how to put it, not sanity check, some way of kind of checking so that this is actually indeed something good to have and something would really have, how to say, not so bad impact. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, Roy?
Well, just one thought on things, and this is true of the early mobile industry, and perhaps it's less true now, and that is that, a lot of new ideas, they're often wacky ideas, there's no guarantee it's going to be successful. And so you're kind of going through a phase of trying to prove an idea works. And to have, half your team being the security guys who stop people trying to break it is a really hard engineering and resource issue for that idea, because, why are we going to effectively double the cost of a project? Because it just may not be a great idea. And obviously now it's much more pervasive, and you have to think about those things up front. But I think that was part of the early industry,
But can I add to it? Because I think that's also kind of related to earlier comments about the impact, or to what extent of how big an impact, the good or bad impact, you could have immediately, and what it takes to kind of roll it back if something bad happens. If I'm just experimenting something in my lab, something went wrong, fine, I can still under control to some extent. But
Christian?
this kind of already went out to millions of users, and now all of a sudden, it's not easy to roll back to something that I didn't envision. Sorry.
Yeah, so our work should not just be driven by technology. We should look at unmet needs, and if you have put out a product, for example, like something like Alexa, etc., when there was, there's a problem with it, try to solve those problems. So it has to come from two sides. If you have like a very futuristic kind of a need which cannot be met, but if the technology, and also if you just have a cool technology and try to sell it, that never works.
Any other comments? Yeah, Dave?
So this sort of reminds me of, why did, for a long time, all laptops, for example, have cameras built into them pointing at your face while you're continuously using the laptop? Somebody had the idea that we all wanted that, and now it seems the industry has finally recognized that we didn't want that. Maybe we wanted a camera, but we didn't want it in our face all the time. So suddenly, I'm not sure, last year or two, I'm not sure when I started noticing this, laptops now come with the obvious addition of a little plastic louver that can cover the camera.
Do you know how much work it took to get that through my company?
I'm
to
sure.
get that little slider?
I'm sure.
You probably added 3 cents to the cost of each laptop.
Well, it wasn't just that, it's the thickness. You've got to have the thickness compete with the thickness of the other, yeah. So,
I go into Windows Device Manager and disable the camera device.
Any other? Yes, Mary?
So actually, just to add on to that, I think I unfortunately have a reputation inside my company for being sort of a wet blanket about a lot of things. Sometimes that's useful, looking at things we're rolling out and just trying to envision what can go wrong with this. I don't think you can possibly imagine all the things that can go wrong with something. It's sort of like a public health thing. The individual is going to be this way, but what effect will it have on the health of the public as a whole? Sometimes it's hard to envision all that, but I think it always helps at least to stop and ask the question, get a few people to have a discussion about it before you roll something out. And I mean, for me inside my company, also just going to end users, and I did a bunch of studies of people and like why they put the sticky tape over and stuff, and it was that kind of ammunition about what people are really feeling, and the reasons why that helped us get through. I mean, not all our laptops, by the way, only certain ones that, but it's something like that where you can actually go up against the forces of cost and industrial design and things like that and have some kind of impact.
So I think we should stop here. Thank you, Christine. I want to ask one last question of all of the participants, okay? We'll start with Roy. You get to go first this time. Okay. So I want you to look ahead. This has all been mostly about the past with a little bit of the future, but this very last question, I'd really like you to look at the future. Okay. So looking ahead, pick a number, 5 years, 10 years, some such number. And what do you think are the most important challenges broadly in mobile computing that need to be met? And part of it includes the community question, which is, it could be technical or it could be more social, but relating to mobile computing. Roy?
I think the security and privacy one really is the primary issue over the next 5 years, because we've achieved pervasiveness. That's the thing, and security and privacy has lagged behind for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. So I think that's what's got to happen. And, I think the cost of things like memory will continue to go down and some of these devices. So it shouldn't be such a big deal to store a lot of information locally and to have guards around that information. So I'm optimistic that we can build, for instance, IoT devices which maintain their sensor sets, and then there's some controls over whether that's released to the cloud or not. But yes, I think that's what needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Roy. Marvin?
I'm going to agree. Security and privacy, it's obvious. That's what we have to deal with, right? It's what's in our face every day in the newspapers and so forth. But I'm going to add a nuance to that, which is blast radius. And what do I mean by that? Mostly, I think if you hear the term security and privacy, you're probably thinking of somebody stealing your passwords or you know, the usual stuff, right? In a world where everything is interconnected, mistakes now travel very fast and potentially very far. And there are systems, architectural considerations that you can put into a system in order to limit the blast radius of when things go wrong. And I think that's an actual, very tangible research topic, right? There's a ton of stuff to do that's the traditional security and privacy, but this sort of systems attitude of how do I ensure that things don't go everywhere? You know, now that my car is a computer with wheels that is interconnected with everything else, it's really scary to think about bugs, whether intentional or not, can affect where I'm driving. So that to me is one of the big things I think that, that needs more attention, is going to become increasingly important. Doug?
So, I mean, I work on large-scale cloud databases, and so a lot of what I think about are data management issues. Roy mentioned IoT, and Marvin mentioned that earlier. The amount of data that we're generating these days is just huge. It's larger than we can ship across our networks. I know we have high bandwidth networks, but we still have no ability to send all the data that's coming from all these devices, and we have to figure out how to figure out what's the right part of that data that needs to get sent, what part of it can get done locally, how do we do that automatically. There are huge real-time analytics that got mentioned earlier, problems of dealing with this data in intelligent ways and feeding them into machine learning devices and systems. And I don't think we're anywhere close to having solved those problems.
Christian?
So I agree with some of the panelists here about security and privacy, but I'm not going to say anything about it. Enough has been said about it. I mentioned autonomous systems. So today the model of the mobile computing we've been talking about is smartphones with some servers, etc. But if you have a number of these autonomous units like cars, etc., how will they work together, create a safe system? I think this is where the next big challenge will be, and perhaps we will have a world that will be safer as a result of that. Yes?
Thank you. Randy?
Yeah, so I want to come back to that vision that was referred to earlier about Mark Weiser's vision of ubiquitous computing, that computing would disappear into the environment around you. It's good to go back and read that paper from how many decades ago, because you know, I look out at the audience and a bunch of you have your phone in front of you alongside your laptop, which is open, and you're doing your email right now, and you also maybe have a pad. And you kind of think about what happened to the computing kind of becoming invisible. I mean, at what point, why do I still need a personal device if we have this cloud technology and our stuff is in the cloud and we should be able to access it everywhere and anywhere? And can I just interact with the environment, or if I need to, you know, sort of with my glasses and using the table, I could send or dictate an email message or something like that. When you kind of think about the vision that Mark had those 3+ decades ago, we're pretty far from really realizing the disappearance of personal devices and the need to carry something with you, and that there's elements of the infrastructure we can access almost anywhere, but there's still a lot of aspects about the edge, gadgets, that I think we need to make some advancement of to make them disappear.
Thank you. Dave?
So I want to agree with the comments about security and privacy, but I want to focus on location privacy. Our devices we carry with us track us everywhere we go and report that to who knows who. It is. My car is now 6 years old, and it has many kinds of radios built in, including radar for forward collision warning and adaptive cruise control. But I'm very happy that it does not have cellular built in. It does not have Wi-Fi built in. So my car can't track me everywhere I go, except, of course, my phone is in my pocket, so I'm still being tracked everywhere I go. There have been lots of solutions proposed for this. There's just not commonly available yet. You know, if you think about a weather application where it's going to report the forecast for the city you're in, it doesn't need to know that I'm in this chair in this building in Santa Cruz. It just needs to know I'm in Santa Cruz. I mean, there's a lot of location information that apps don't need that they get. that's only scratching the surface of the location privacy. There's problems. There's lots of solutions I'm sure that haven't come up yet, but it's a big problem. It's a growing problem. We're all being tracked everywhere we go all the time by many people. We have no idea who's getting that data. We accept it because we get so much benefit from it.
Mike?
Great. So it's definitely more fun to go earlier in the rotation than later. Because I think I'm going to say kind of what Randy said. Maybe I'll try to put a different spin on it. So I think, to me, the real challenge is around the issue of human-centered design. And we're building devices that are increasingly, just part of how we live. But we're not thinking about the design of those devices from the point of view of behavioral science and how people live their lives. I was struck by, if you've ever seen the movie Wall Street, there's a character, Gordon Gekko, who's supposed to be kind of this master of the universe. And he's like such a high-tech guy that he has a cell phone. And when he's about to make a call to do some horrible deal to put somebody out of business, he picks up this thing that looks like a shoe. Maybe it's like this big, and he holds it up, and it almost ruins the movie because you're like, that's ridiculous. I mean, and you think about like our kids or grandkids looking back and seeing everybody walking around holding this like little thing to their phone, basically giving up one of your arms. Or walking across the street, crossing in front of traffic with your face in the, and they're going to say, what the hell were you guys thinking? And so, I think it is the Mark Weiser vision, but also we need to be working more closely with people who are thinking about things like design and psychology and behavioral science to figure out really how to crack this problem.
Thank you, Mike. Nigel?
Yeah, I'm going to sort of focus on the user end as well. I mean, one of the things that's always been interesting about mobile computing is we sort of focused on the things that are limited when you're mobile, so limited power, limited storage, limited communications, and so on. And I think for me, the thing that's really becoming limiting is sort of the abilities of the human and the sort of cognitive load that these devices are putting on us. I was sort of inspired by Satya's kind of periodic table analogy, and I was sort of sitting here doodling about tiers of annoyance of mobile devices, right? And I realized that there was another dimension, which is the ownership of the devices. So it's very annoying when my phone pings and I have to reply to a message, but it's somehow not quite as annoying as when the person I'm talking to's phone pings and then they reply to the message. And this sense of trying to work out how we're going to build these devices that don't just keep putting more and more distraction and more cognitive load on us. I'm old enough to remember my parents telling me not to watch TV when I was doing my homework. Right? And now, my kids do the homework with like 4 parallel YouTube videos open, and it's like, man, really? And I think some sense of just making it stop would be kind of an interesting one about how we manage the load that we're putting on people in design systems that really kind of are able to cope with that.
Thank you, Nigel. Mary?
I will absolutely echo what Nigel was saying. I think human attention has become tremendously fought over by different systems. And often when we look at one problem in the world, like for instance, privacy and use of your private data, we make something worse someplace else. I mean, think of like all the notice and consent things that pop up. That is also a distraction, and it's very hard in the moment to go and read those things and understand what you just gave away. I think we are approaching a lot of our solutions to one problem without thinking holistically about the rest of the problem and the attention and desires and lack of desires of the end user, and not just as the individual, but as groups of people as well.
Fantastic. You have the last word, Mushtaq.
So I think I'm going to go back to the security and privacy. The reason I have not been coming to these conferences is because I've been going to several of the security conferences. And I think it's more than security and privacy. It's really sort of a question of trust. And I think all the societal thing we're talking about, and I'm not convinced. So I think if you can probably engineer a sequence of events that would significantly degrade people's confidence in all the things that we do on a daily basis. And do people understand it? So the last 1 year, a number of us have worked on security of elections. The state I come from has these DRE machines with nothing. And we have gone and talked to lots of people about what can go wrong. And it's very hard to, someone stands up and says, well, it's hard to get new machines and educate people. And that argument sways, the 20 minutes of argument I made. So I think the bigger challenge for us is educating people when it comes to security and privacy. If you really care about privacy, something is of value to you, should be willing to pay for it. I haven't seen evidence that people are willing to pay for privacy. And
so working on that is a challenge for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Great. So this now brings us to the end of our panel. Before we sort of all go off and drink coffee or whatever, please remember that these are 10 extraordinarily busy people, some of whom have crossed the country to come and spend this hour and a half with us. I want to thank them all, and please give them a big applause.